a Disruptors Co broadcast. And we're really excited to have a great panel tonight for you. And I want to start by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which we meet. This is the Darug people from where I am hosting. And I'd like to pay my respects to elders past, present, and emerging, and make sure that everyone is really feeling the same in their location, and that they're respecting and engaging with the ongoing cultures and connections of people in the lands on which we meet and where you meet. I'd like to start by obviously introducing you to our panel tonight. We have Wayne Slager from Synergy Group, we have Patrina Casey from CIRA, and we have Nadine Castle from the Culture Group. I'll get each of you to introduce yourselves quickly to each of the panel and to the audience. Start with Patrina.
Thanks, Gavin. It's wonderful to be here this afternoon or this evening. So my name is Patrina Casey. I'm a director at CIRA. CIRA is the State Insurance Regulatory Authority. So we regulate workers' compensation, CTP insurance and home building insurance in New South Wales. Gavin has also asked us to mention one insight in relation to working in, I guess, a COVID environment. And while we found it challenging at times, I guess the insight that I have is really the connectedness. I felt more connected to team members, both at my executive level as well as the broader team that I manage, probably than I ever have in my career, actually. So I think it's brought a real connectedness and a shared outcome that has been, I guess, somewhat unexpected but welcomed.
Great. Wayne?
Thanks, Gavin. Wayne Slager. I run a business network called CNRG, or Synergy, if you say it phonetically. So I suppose the value or the opportunity I have is to speak to many of my members and understand the way that they're running their business and their practice and the way that they're interacting with their clients and other stakeholders. So I've got the privilege of having a multifaceted perspective on what's currently happening. In terms of perceptions or takeaways, I work from home anyway, so that's not anything significant. Many of my members are micro practices, so their individual impact is not massive or traumatic, but clearly the clients and businesses that they in turn work with that deal with consumers and business customers, the flow-on effect from the COVID disruption is significant. So all of us are impacted in some shape or form, whether it's directly or indirectly.
Great. And Nadine?
Thanks, Gavin. Hi, everyone. My name is Nadine Castle, and I'm a director and co-founder of the Culture Group. Our business is all around culture, leadership, and coaching. And I think one of the key insights that we've experienced internally as a business, but also with our clients, is that innovation and the ability to pivot as needed through this experience, and bringing that creativity to life has been really quite remarkable of what we've seen, what we've done internally, but what we've seen our clients do as well.
Great, thanks, Nadine. So one of the reasons that we were really keen to have you all involved in this panel discussion is that we were finding that as we were moving through the COVID period of time, we kept hearing these conversations about bouncing back or bouncing back better, or even beyond that, the idea of recovering. And the more that I thought about it and the more conversations we had with people that were living through this, as we all are, was that there was a greater sense of not just recovering, but resetting. And I like the idea of the reset because it felt like we were learning some things that we maybe already knew but hadn't acknowledged, and that we were learning new things about the way that we work that we'd like to keep when we eventually go back to what a new normal might look like. And I think the more that we spoke about this and the more that we thought about it, the more it felt like we were going to reach a reset rather than a recovery. and I was sort of looking to explore some of those sorts of things. So maybe we could start with you, Nadine, on that angle, and sort of look at the idea of, if you're facilitating cultural change within organizations, and we know that this is a time of change and transformation, what have you observed with your clients and with people that you're working with? How is it manifesting for you?
Yeah, it's a really important point to cover, and I think I like the word reset. Some of the things that we've been talking about with our clients, and we've been keeping in quite close contact with our clients, because they're all in different markets, they're all in different, all being affected quite differently from the COVID experience, and taking the opportunity to have a pause and reflect on some of the practices people have put in place to manage the crisis of COVID, and connecting greater with people is kind of one of the things that has come out quite significantly. But there's a balance, and I think the balance is we've got an opportunity to reset and reimagine, but the challenge is not to revert back once this is over. And I think that's the agenda that we need to keep the narrative around, is take the time to pause, reflect on what's worked well, what do we need to bring in and protect from our past to bring into our future, what can we learn from the COVID experience, but how do we reimagine? Because the dance floor, is what I like to call it, that we're all working in, is changing, and it will change forever. So how do we reimagine how we work with our customers, how do we deliver our strategy to ensure that we are meeting the new dance floor?
I love the new dance floor. That's a great idea. Although I haven't danced for quite some time, and you might not like my moves, but
well, we talk a lot about the balcony and the dance floor. That's a Hertzford analogy and principle from years ago, but it still makes a lot of sense. And so our dance floor has changed and is changing.
I love it. That sounds great. So Wayne, in terms of the dance floor, who's on your dance floor, and what does that mean for a network? How do you bring like a membership network to dance? Because it's like group dancing, right, in big circles.
Well, it is, and I've built a team of people in the B2B advice and specialist service space. So the shared interest is that we're all looking to help owners and leaders of high growth companies accelerate their path to success. So we've all got different perspectives, different interests, different levels of activity, but that's that point of commonality. And we're looking to see how we can help owners and leaders of those enterprises face whatever it is that's on their to-do list. And if the impact of COVID directly and indirectly is near the top, then obviously that's a common topic of conversation. Sorry, you had a question there?
Yeah, I was just going to ask whether there was a way of identifying people in terms of those networks. Do you find that the COVID experience is providing a pathway for them to have a shared experience that they can start discussing the impact on their business or the impact on their mental health or their focus or any of those sorts of things?
Well, there's two parts of the community. Obviously, my inner circle is the leaders, advisors, mentors, consultants that are servicing the wider business community. So there's my immediate community that I contact and connect with, and then in turn the second layer is their own respective communities. So I'm seeing a little bit of both. So in terms of team, I'll give you one practical example. A founding lawyer, managing partner for a regional law firm, mentioned that as his team was working from home, the productivity reduced noticeably, almost immediately. Mm-hmm. And so his challenge was, well, how do we fix that? And it came in two ways. One is the technical side of how do we make sure that information is readily available, how do they access it, how do they edit it and change it, how do they share it, how do they store it. So there's a lot of that practical and technical stuff. The other side of it was to make sure that there was a continued engagement with each team member. And what we commonly refer to as the water cooler chatter. So there was the emotional, subjective information that was being shared previously in a confined or specific physical space. That space had disappeared. So he found it absolutely necessary, and his key role as a leader and for his team leaders was to have those micro conversations with each individual person. So the terminology, maybe someone has already coined this, I expect that they have, but what comes to mind is that leaders need to increase their communication bandwidth to not only download information to their team, but also upload so that they're getting timely feedback, what's working, what's not working, not only at a practical level, but also at an emotional level.
Absolutely. That sounds great. Petrina, is that something that you've also experienced? So in the world of government and government agencies, you've got multiple stakeholders. I can't imagine how many water coolers you have to be able to get across all those conversations, and how much bandwidth you need as a leader to be able to engage all those stakeholders. What have you found?
Look, I think it's been a really interesting time, and I think a real unifying part of, I guess, this whole COVID experience has been, I guess, a shared outcome. So while we have, as you pointed out, in government, a lot of stakeholders, a lot of engagement, I would suggest that in this time, it's been almost easier in some ways to have that engagement and to cut through and get adaptations is the word that I'll use, whether it's policy adaptations or service adaptations in place because of this kind of shared outcome. So it's been a really interesting time, and a time where, picking up on what Nadine said, we've learned a lot that we want to bring into not only how we engage with customers and stakeholders to make sure that we don't revert to some of the things that we did in the past, and really honing our communication skills and our collaboration skills so that we can find that common ground or that common outcome that's necessary in a post-COVID world, and particularly when we're in a position where, some workplaces are not resetting or restarting because in fact they've never left some of the essential services, and then we have other workplaces that are resetting and restarting, whatever word we choose. So really honing our craft, if you like, in relation to what's the common outcome, what are we here to do. And I guess the last few months have really proven that when we want to, not just government, but collectively, whether it's the citizens of New South Wales or whatever cohort we're talking about, we actually can achieve a lot.
Brilliant. It is a massive challenge, of course, because you do have so many situations taking place, and even individually, I think with Sarah, where the focus is actually on that sort of recovery of mental health recovery at work. So do you see some of that kind of flavour starting to creep in, like even just within your own teams?
Look, absolutely, and it's front and center. And look, again, we'd like to think that it's front and center, in a non-COVID world as well. We're in the business of regulating workers' compensation, so all things workplace, all things thinking about the culture of the workplace. How do we support employers? How do we support injured people? Is front and center. But really, in the environment of COVID, mental health has come really to the forefront of that conversation. And to be in a position to support your customers, we have to be in a position where, as leaders within government, that we're ensuring that our staff and our people are equipped to be able to provide the support to customers. So I see it very much, what we're learning and what we're doing for customers is actually translating internally, and I guess the other way around as well.
Great. If I'd just like to remind people who are watching the live stream that they can leave comments in the comment window, and they'll come through to us, and we'll take those comments and we'll pass them on to the panel if you have any particular questions. Throwing up another question, or throwing out a question to the whole panel, what do you see in terms of this space, so post-COVID world? What do you think is going to manifest differently for government, differently for commercial organisations, and differently for not-for-profits, for example? Or do you think we're all facing the same sort of challenges?
I'll be cheeky and say that government's in a privileged position of spending other people's money and stealing from the future. So that's my only contribution on government. But apologies to present company. But certainly there's a distinction between commercial and not-for-profit and the government sector. But on an individual person-to-person level, we're all human beings. We're all facing the internal issues in our micro communities. So from that respect, then, you have to say that there's a lot of commonality as well.
Mm-hmm.
Just to add to that, I think there's definitely an economic and a social impact COVID has on, and it doesn't matter if you're working in government trying to support that from that perspective, or you're in a commercial environment or a not-for-profit. The reality is that this pandemic actually has a long-lasting effect outside of the health issues. But from an economic perspective, there's going to be a lot of pressure on businesses wherever they are in terms of performance. There's going to be a lot of pressure on leaders to lean into that and manage that. And there's going to be also a social impact, and whether that's as Petrina talked about, mental health and getting well-being on the agenda, which is a great outcome, I believe. But making sure that we are continuing to dial that up and give that focus. I don't think that discriminates where you're placed.
Yeah. I might add something, Gavin, if that's okay. Look, I agree with Wayne and Nadine in terms there's a commonality no matter where you work, and particularly when we have to reflect on our roles as leaders within our respective organisations. But I think the social impact and the social determinants of health and other things, I think have increased up the agenda. That's probably the wrong way of saying it, but it really has come front and centre. And some of those really wicked problems that government face around housing and other things, I think that there's going to be a very big push, and a government will have to step up to the challenge to be able to tackle those. We've shown across, and look, and I work in the Department of Customer Service, where we not only talk a lot, but a lot of what we do is about putting the customer front and center and trying to make interactions with government seamless, and interact with government once, those sorts of things. And I think this environment has really upped the ante in terms of the expectations of what government can and will need to deliver.
That's very interesting. I really like that idea of we're all being constantly challenged by what COVID is presenting us. So coming back to the dance floor concept that Nadine shared with us, which I absolutely love. Do you think we need to find some new dance moves? Is that part of what we're learning? We're learning these new dance moves for a dance that is just emerging, that we don't really know what looks good, what is good, or is what we can keep doing for a while.
I think we do need to learn some new dance moves. We did a piece of research at the end of last year, and it was about the impact of a hazy future on culture and leadership. And then we went into COVID. So, and the results of that still hold true. And there's things like adaptive thinking and making that a priority for leaders is critical, but the capabilities that the research came out with is still quite low in that area, even though that's a priority. Building trust and communication, making sure that leaders are leaning into that. And, Petrina talked about that at the start of her conversation. So I do think we need to be really focused on what are the new moves that we need to pull into the dance floor to make sure that we are present to manage throughout this experience, but also the ripple effects of the experience and COVID once all these restrictions and some sort of new normal comes back into play.
Interesting. Getting some interesting questions over in the chat window, and one of those is the question around purpose. Are we seeing a more of a focus on purpose, do you think, coming out of this, or it will continue for some time through? Getting some nods, yes.
Who wants to speak to that?
Go for it, Wayne.
Purpose. Well, I'd like to think that we know what our purpose is, but to your question, Gavin, maybe there's now a sharper focus on being able to articulate that from top down so that it becomes real. The old mission statement, collecting dust on the wall or in the drawer, we're now revisiting, well, why are we doing things the way that we are? Who are we doing them with? When are we doing them? And are we doing them in a different way? So all that's underpinned by why. Why are we doing it? Why do we exist? Whether it's a commercial, non-profit or a government organisation, and Petrina spoke to that.
Do you think it might even be a why do we work? Because I think we've got a question here around the 4-day work week that was adopted over in New Zealand. Do you think we're going to see more of that kind of emerging?
Well, I'd like to think that instead of that being mandated, we revisit both as employers and employees, leaders and team members. What if we're wiping the slate, not clean, but taking a lot of the mess away and going back to basics? Do we do them because we've always done it this way? And and I think both for leaders and employees, or whatever position title we want to give them, to have permission, and you use the word trust, and maybe the new way of work is the new way of trust. Let me just coin it in that term. That employers are afraid that they no longer have direct, immediate visual oversight and therefore control over their team, and they're now disparate. So is their position somewhat threatened because they're not leading the way that they were leading before? And then from the team member's point of view, I'm now doing my job. I'm feeling comfortable that I'm being responsible in my duties, but I'm no longer physically visible. So am I being valued in the way that I was valued before? Because that line of sight has disappeared. So I'll let others speak further to that.
Gavin, I'm happy to just make a comment on that, and it's picking up on something Nadine said as well. I think one of the pleasing things from my perspective that has come out of this, I see an amped up conversation around flexibility, inclusion, diversity, which it's always been part of our landscape, and I'm sure Nadine can talk much more expertly than I on this, but I think it's really allowed a very open conversation around flexibility, 4-day week, working from home, and that we have, I guess, I don't know, there's a new confidence about what we can achieve without necessarily having to be seen, as Wayne talked about there. So I think it's a really pleasing thing. I think, and that conversation will need to occur. It'll be a while before workplaces are, back in a traditional sense, with all the COVID safe environment, etc. That will need to be in place.
Really, that's a really great point. Thank you for that. What I think is what we're sort of seeing is a lot of change leading up to this, and then a lot of transition that's going to take place as we start to get those dance moves down and don't feel quite so uncoordinated, I think, as one of our commenters mentioned in those moves. So if we just maybe shift up the gears a little bit here and maybe jump over to Nadine. One of the questions I've got for you is around the different types of industries that you've worked in. So education and energy, for example, which are really different. But how do you think those different industries will be tackling this challenge of working post-COVID and adapting to the new conditions or the new dance moves?
Look, I think it comes down to, because they are quite different and they've been affected differently. So education, particularly higher education versus secondary education, but higher education, have had quite a bit of their funding removed with international students not being able to travel, and it's quite significant for them. Whereas the energy sector is still powering on, and literally, pardon the pun. And I think it comes back to strategy, and it comes back to what they need to focus on, and how they need to adapt and pivot for their circumstances. I don't think it's a one-size-fits-all approach, and they're certainly not talking about that at all. And I think it links back to making sure that they've got the right focus in the right areas, with the overlay of COVID, but also linking back to their strategic intent. Strategy is not lost here. And to the point before around purpose, it's actually even more critical to be very clear on your organisational purpose, sharing that story and getting your people connected to that in a face of adversity. So the thing that makes people proud of working for an organisation is critical, and actually does need to be highlighted more than what we had before.
Yeah, really interesting. I think one of the challenges is one, having strategy in the right, and a flexible strategy and an adaptive strategy, and then sort of tipping into that, how do we bring our networks to play? And Wayne, you've already spoken about the idea of trust, which I really like. How do you see the role of strategy and trust combining to deliver some sort of value there?
That's a deep question. Well, strategy's got to come out of values. If that's not aligned, then you're faking it. So all the things that are internal, top-down leadership, the values of the owners, the values of the board, the values of the executive are expressed both directly and indirectly, visibly and invisibly, all those things. So your questions around culture and strategy. So you can, I'll say, we'll try and tackle this thing that's in front of us. It's caught us unawares. We'll implement a new strategy or refine an existing one. Well, unless those things that we attempt to do align with the culture and values of the organisation, there's going to be a breakdown and a disconnect somewhere. So, to the points that are already being made, be very careful that there's an alignment. And if you don't know to Nadine's point, what your culture, values, and purpose are, then you pretty well need to find them pretty soon, because anything that you try and cobble together artificially outside of that is doomed to failure.
And do you think that has that relationships? How do relationships play that role? Because I think this is one of the interesting challenges. Is we used to rely a lot on the fact that we would be in location with each other, and now we aren't. So how do we use networks and our values to build those relationships so that we can work together as teams and collaborate and continue to do so really well? Not just an easy question, right?
Well, yeah, thanks. I'll give a momentary pause, which we're very encouraging, everyone to do, is to take pause and to cause some thinking. So I'll take my own advice. Again, I think it's going to be something that you're willing to do, to make it your way, to collaborate, because the wonder of the technological age is that we're increasingly narrow and deep in our respective areas of expertise, and that's fantastic. I mean, if you want a deep subject matter expert on something, you're bound to find them. But what goes with that is that silos then appear, and it's increasingly difficult. Friction appears to try and join your expertise with the next person's, whether that's an internal relationship or an external one that applies in both occasions. So if we look at that purpose, well, who is it that we are serving? What do they need? And if I'm providing quality advice, support, service, etc., product in my area of expertise, in my domain, let's not forget that the client is looking for a solution to the whole pie, not just one piece of the pie. So it then becomes our opportunity, if not an obligation, to make sure that we're connecting and aligning our contribution to that conversation with the other stakeholders and contributors to that same conversation, whether it's us that are bringing them to the table because we have the opportunity of doing that, and that's one of the things that I do as a professional connector, or if we're in a specific role, to see who else is in the client's community that we should be having conversations with, so that there's multifaceted conversations, not just linear.
Yeah, so one of the questions we've got in the chat channel is around the concept of values and how they play out in our dealings with each other, and also the dealings with the organization. So how do people think this is going to take place? Do you think the values are going to be really core to the way that we are engaging with our communities, and also and therefore maybe even our profitability, our sustainability, and so on? What is everyone's perception of that?
Well, my whole business is based around this, and for organisations to be truly successful and drive performance, and in the end get the profit that they need, values and culture is the DNA of how it happens, and harnessing that and linking to that. This has been. We talked earlier on about the social impact that COVID has had. So people need to align back to their core values. Leaders need to lead from their value set. And that shift is going to be absolutely critical. And we will see when people don't do that. And we will see organisations who don't live by those rules. That will come out in spades. There's nowhere to hide now. We cannot continue with a command and control type of approach. We can't put profit before purpose. So those shifts actually need to start now.
Mm.
And to that, Nadine, it just occurred to me that there's a lot of focus on the financial stability of businesses and what's being done or not being done, and I won't get distracted into that conversation. But to your point, I think it's an excellent one, that it's just as likely that that misalignment of DNA or values and core purpose, that is just as likely, if not more likely, going to lead to death and failure of that enterprise, as opposed to, oh, well, our cash flow's been disrupted to the point of instability. It could be one or the other, but I'm putting equal weight on what you've just said, apart in addition to the numbers around money.
I'm finding what's interesting in this space where we are still, physically isolated from each other, but maybe not so, not socially necessarily. What I'm finding interesting is that we're using technology more and more to be able to do exactly as we're doing here. So we're still being able to meet, we're still being able to discuss, and we're increasingly being able to collaborate. And Petrina, we've done a small project together on using our platform. Maybe you could share some experiences from the digital experiences or the digital collaborations that you've been running over the last couple of months, and how that's sort of informed the way that you think about where we're going.
Yeah, look, absolutely, Gavin. And the thing, I guess, just drawing a thread from that last conversation, I think even the digital expertise, if I can put it that way, has really also brought to the fore a conversation around being inclusive and, capability building and ensuring that nobody's left behind. So it brings into the realm of everything in relation to culture and values and how we bring people together. But from a perspective of I guess continuing on with business and events and accessing insights and input into various things that we have been running, we really have been able to, I guess, keep productivity, probably even accelerate productivity in many areas. And I guess what I would think we've done quite well is broken down some of those myths and barriers that people perceived were there around technology. I think we've also become, and I'm using the kind of we in a very generic sense, been a bit more patient and flexible with people. So if the technology didn't work to begin with, well, that's okay, let's have patience. Or if, my 9-year-old comes on the screen and tells me something he shouldn't have said, well, we're being a little bit more accepting of those sorts of things. So I think it has made us a little bit more patient, a bit more inclusive, while keeping the productivity and the connectedness there. I'm not sure I've answered your question actually in relation to the specifics of but we've used different platforms. So we had a wonderful event that you ran for us from a technology perspective and a facilitation perspective. It was actually around mental health, and where people had to go into small groups and come up with ideas. And look, it ran really well, and I wouldn't hesitate to have those sorts of collaborations again. We don't need to wait till we can be physically together to have those things. So I think that's been really, really, really good.
Yeah, interestingly on that front, what we've seen, and I think what I've been really excited about, is the idea that people are being a little bit more generous in spirit, and they are being more permissive, and often the people that wouldn't normally participate well in a group setting are actually feeling quite comfortable about doing it online. So we're finding we get a diversity of perspective and input in ways that we maybe don't get when we do meet face to face. Has anyone else found that at all?
Could I just make just one more? We spend a lot of time in my environment talking about, creating what we call a psychologically safe workplace. So we regulate the workers' compensation system where, injured people come back into work. But even in our own space, we talk about that. And what I've found is that over the last period, the COVID period, that we've probably been more open around what that actually means for more people than we have been previously. And as you said, people are joining in that conversation that perhaps previously might have, been a little bit more shy about participating. So sorry, I just wanted to share that for that question.
No, that's great. And on a similar front, Nadine, I know that you have been running a program called Dialogue in the Dark, and which is a very specific kind of program. Maybe you could tell us a little bit about how that has been working. Oh, we've got you on mute.
There we go.
There we go.
Dialogue in the Dark is a immersive experience. It's facilitated by vision impaired or totally blind facilitators, our team, which are an amazing team, and it's an amazing experience for people with social distancing and COVID restrictions. It can't run. It's not safe to run. So we had to adapt and think about how do we get the essence of that into a different form. So we've created Dialogue with Distance. And there's a couple of things I want to say around this. So the first one is, and it's to your point, what you were just making there, Petrina, it's an even playing field, I think, now. And it gives us, I suppose, an opportunity for people with disabilities to be more included in the workplace and let them shine a lot more. And, when we were thinking about how to share the stories, the experience, and expertise of our facilitators, we started unpacking the COVID lens a little bit more. They are Uber users of working in disruption, facing adversity, having to connect and communicate without sight, like most of us. And that story needs still to be told, and they need to share that story. So we created a online virtual program called Dialogue with Distance, and the premise is around how do you bridge the distance of remote working so you can better collaborate as teams, how you can still build trust, how you can shift your ways of working and collectively problem solve. And having Catherine, who's our lead facilitator, and the team being able to still do that and bring that to the market, I think is a really powerful success story.
I love the sound of that. It sounds amazing.
It's awesome.
I'll have to sign up for the next one.
You will.
So for those who are tuning in, if you'd like to ask the panel any questions specifically, if you could drop those into the comment section, we'll get around to those in the next few minutes. But in the meantime, I'll just throw over to the panel again, just to say, if you found a tool or a technology or something that you really have found has been working for you, what is that, and why has it been working, do you think? Who can I start with? Wayne, you're looking like you've got an idea there.
Well, I was being a bit sheepish because my confession is that I really haven't taken a lot of time or trouble to implement new tools, but maybe refocused on old school technology of just picking up the phone and taking the initiative to talk to people that you might otherwise not, because picking up the phone's a bit old hat. But it's actually very worthwhile. And you find that you're revisiting valuable conversations and opening new ones that might otherwise not have occurred.
Look,
So it's a bit crusty and a bit stale, and it doesn't sound sexy, but there's some truth in it. So I can't ignore that.
Pick up the phone. I had a call with someone the other day, and they said, "Oh my God, I'm so glad you called me, and you didn't ask me for a video conference."
There you go. There you go.
And just on, just adding to what Wayne's saying, to me, there's some brilliant technology out there and some great platforms. I think it's finding the things and the tools that help you collaborate, help you. I had a conversation with a client today, and they were talking about the challenges that they're facing with how to influence when we're working remotely, and it comes back to the, those micro conversations that we said before that you have around the water cooler that you're not having anymore. So the ability to influence through co-creating and engaging with people more often and getting technology to do that for you. So to me, technology is the enabler, but the skill set and the behaviours to lean into that is as critical and even more critical than the tools and the systems and the technology that can help support it.
Mm-hmm.
I did chance upon one piece of technology in preparing for today, and it's called TimeChi. So it's a tool to avoid disruption. So there's Disruptors Co and there's anti-disruption, so they're both offering value. But we're constantly interrupted by pinging and messaging and emails, and so I didn't look at it in detail, but the upshot of it, the value proposition, is that it helps you avoid digital disruption as well as personal disruption from co-workers. So you basically got a little electronic flag as to when you're available for conversations and when you're not. So obviously there's a play on Tai Chi as opposed to Time Chi, but if someone wants to have a look at that, it's timechi.com.
Yeah, I did see that one. I think it's been around for a little while. So, and I
more than likely, and I'm late to the party.
Yeah. No, that's all right. I think our other people were promoting it as well today, so maybe they're doing a bit of another push because everyone's feeling a little bit scattered around digital, not disruption, but I guess just a way of having their attention or their focus drawn away from what they're supposed to be focusing on.
Sure.
So we also have another question, actually, from Kate as well, which is around. Yes, so one of the thoughts on divides in the workforce, but also there's another question which is on whether there's any impact on those who are neurodiverse. And so it's a fairly broad question, but has anyone noticed or have any particular insight into that space?
Not me.
Look, I haven't either, except that I think what this environment, and again, I'm probably talking in a general sense, has really meant that we're having to think about reaching. I use the word inclusive, and again, I know I'm probably overusing it, but it really does make you think about how you're engaging different groups of people, and you have to do it in a way that potentially means you need to be a little bit more innovative. And some of the examples that Nadine just talked through, and we have an example we're doing a review into hearing loss. So just understanding how do we make, information and other things available for people who have a hearing impairment. So I think it brings into sharp focus, even though I'm not an expert in that area, Kate, or don't have a specific comment on that. But if anything, and it's probably why you're asking the question, it's making us think about, usually it was just translating things into different languages, which was our way of, broadening access and reach and thinking about literacy and all those sorts of things. But I think this has meant that we are being challenged to think about things and reaching people in a way that we haven't been challenged before.
Yeah, and I would agree with that, Petrina. I think really looking at accessibility and being more focused around that and the need for that. We should have been doing it earlier. But, you know, if COVID has been an instigator to heighten that and bring that to the forefront, I think that's a great, a positive out of a negative situation.
And that's a great segue into one of my another question which I have, which is around what have we learnt out of COVID that we think is a better experience? What experience have we found that is better than it was before? And that's one example.
I think the other thing for me that I think is, you know, maybe a positive out of this is around wellbeing and getting wellbeing on the agenda. It has to be on the agenda now for organisations. It's an important part of culture, and I think you know, bringing that to the forefront is a really great outcome, assuming that we do stuff with it.
Exactly.
I think the thing that I would say, in addition to what we talked about, and I'll throw out the inclusive word again, but I think that's been a big one. But it's forced us to think, I think, a bit more deeply about issues. So it's thinking about, I'm trying to think of an example, but really forcing us to think deeply so that we get to an outcome. And I'm not saying that we didn't think about it in that way before, but it's, you know, if we use mental health as the example, we've talked about that for a while, but really what does that mean and how do we need to ensure that we have that kind of intensiveness of action and we keep that in a sustained way.
Really good point. I think that's also been really surprising in the COVID space, because those people who would maybe not necessarily have understood the complexities of mental health have found the mental toughness that comes with social isolation or working from home has become a much more prevalent or more persistent experience for them than otherwise they might have experienced before. So it's kind of interesting. And I think as Robert has asked the question here, what is the key change needed for pre-COVID leaders in a post-COVID economy? Maybe that sort of mental health awareness is one of those elements.
I think absolutely, and leading into that is stress management. You know, as I said earlier on, the dance floor has changed, and the pressure on leaders is going to be a lot more intense than what it was pre-COVID. So I think understanding the impact of stress and wellbeing on yourself, but in the other things that leaders need to look at post-COVID is around the ability to build trust, and really being overt around how that's happening, how to relinquish control and empower people to deliver, how to galvanise teams and support them. I think they're all going to be really critical elements post-COVID, and creating positive cultures that foster team collaboration, foster supporting one another, and fostering the values of the organisation.
It's interesting. One of the things I've noticed was that when COVID hit, it kind of created shockwaves. So we kind of were hit by this shockwave, and it's taken us, knocked off balance. You know, our dance moves were all gone, but then we're now starting to come back to understanding the rituals of our work, the importance of the routines of our work, and also the needs of our work, because we realize this is actually not just going to go back to anything that it was the same way it was before very quickly. So we're needing to create new ways of doing things. And from I guess from the Disruptors Code point of view, we sort of found ourselves in that situation, going, how do we help our clients continue to do the work that they need to do, and then also how do we keep doing the work that we do, and So our very first step was looking at and creating a platform called iHack Online. But what we've also done is we've pivoted that into another platform called the Air.works, taking a bit of a lead on the from Airbnb in terms of that we understand that technology and so on can deliver something of value there. But rather than talking about it, I thought I might invite my colleague Joanne Jacobs to do a quick demonstration of that. So see how it looks.
I've been playing in the background, folks. This is going to be a very, very quick, super quick version of the walkthrough of the process, because it's going to be, we're only running out of time. We've got 5 minutes left to go on this process. So I am going to, oh, that's not very good. I'm going to stop that, remove that from the stream for the time being, and then I'm going to try that again. Let me see and go. Okay, beautiful. So you can see my screen, right? You can see this baby. So this is a bit of a gift for Nadine, because this is the Air.works working for her own platform. So we created something that we thought was going to be an easy way of ensuring that people who come from different kind of walks of life can all come together and collaborate over one kind of process. So what we've got is a simple landing page which is branded for any particular client. Then you've got the details of whatever session it is that you're actually engaging with. There's an opportunity to launch a separate meeting. If you go, hi, me again. A separate meeting. So there's plenary sessions, and then there's team sessions. So you've actually got a chance to get into a group area where people can talk together as part of their team. They can actually communicate via a chat window, and then they've got an opportunity to work on a series of canvases that they might actually need to use to solve a problem together. The idea being that anybody, regardless of what kind of technology skills they have, can at least be able to jump into an area and start typing whatever they want to actually start saying to everybody else within their teams. So that was the objective of the process, was always to ensure that we had a way of working together with people from different organisations coming together and actually allowing themselves to be sharing information in a safe environment. We're Switzerland for idea sharing. That's how I like to think of it anyway. That's just a very, very brief run through of the Airworks. For those of you who have asked questions in the chat channel, we're going to try and in the last 3 minutes get to walking through some of those questions and then getting some final thoughts. So I'm signing off here, but lovely to actually be participating in today's panel. Thank you to all the guests, and I'll pass it back.
Great. So I do have a couple of other questions. We have one from Robert, who's asking, what do you think the impact will be with the significant job losses due to COVID and the transition into the new normal in a shrinking recession economy with less job opportunity? Oh, big question.
Big question.
That is a big question.
I know it's a pat word, but resilience is something that we're not only collectively responsible for, but also individually responsible for. It's not down to everyone else to make me feel safe and happy, but there's a primary responsibility for each of us to do that. But certainly no man is an island, so find and reach out to those that are appropriate to help you build that resilience, because Robert's point refers correctly. There's going to be significant job losses and business failures, and with all respect to the attempts to try and pump up the tyres, there is going to be a significant amount of business failure regardless of what is done. And so those business owners and those employees will need to hold fast initially, but then also take action to redeploy, reposition, relocate even on occasions, to find a way of contributing value back in the best way that they can. Obviously, to firstly sustain themselves, but also find a rightful place in the community that they're part of.
And I was thinking about this today, and I think I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, Petrina. But as we start to go back to work, in whatever work that is, and whether it's a small or a different type of work, there's bound to be lessons that you know and understand from the work that you do, in terms of how do we become comfortable again in our workplaces. What do you think might be a way of thinking about that?
Yeah, look, it's interesting, and when Nadine started talking about the dance card, I recently started reading, I guess, again, some of the return to work literature that is familiar to me, but there's a lot of lessons that out of that old dance card, if I can put it in that way, that we can certainly bring into this new environment. And they tend to be the things around supporting and connecting individuals, but also ensuring that employers have the support that they need to support their employees in the workplace. There's some other things that are really coming through loud and clear, that there isn't a one size fits all. So we are having to think about tailored supports and connections, which can be challenging when we try to put a digital lens over things. But I think the other thing that this time has taught us is that there is a lot of innovation, there is a lot of disruptors, there's a lot of people who are pivoting in a way that is adding to I guess, the return to work environment. So yeah, I think there are a lot of lessons that we can learn, and making sure that we use what we know from before, but bring it into the current environment.
Brilliant. So I know that we're at time now at 6:30. So I just throw it out to each of you just quickly, if you have any closing thoughts that you'd like to share with the audience.
Happy to go with that one. One of the things that I guess I've been reflecting on as a leader in government is really moving from what I'm calling a kind of hierarchical environment to a networked environment. And I think what we've shown, and certainly my experience over the last time in government, is that when you really get those networks and those collaborations going, some of that, bureaucracy and other things, and I'm not suggesting we're doing things without going through the right approvals or anything of that nature, but when you have that clear outcome, it's just really been an awesome thing to be part of that, where we could make changes very, very quickly. If you had asked me 6 months ago, with some of the changes that we made, would we be able to do them in that time frame? And I would have probably said no. So for me, a big learning is moving from hierarchical to more networked ways of working.
Brilliant.
I'll simply say, don't stress, take your time. No one has all the answers. So if you're feeling a little lost and alone, you're not. So don't rush. Give yourself time to pause and think things through, and do things in an orderly fashion. It'll still be there tomorrow.
Brilliant. Nadine?
And probably just to add, I agree with both Petrina and Wayne. I think they're really important points. Community is the word that I want to say. Australia now has closed its borders, and they're going to be closed for a while. So how do we support our community, people within our, not just our work community, but our social communities as well, and put into place the focus and the focused support for our communities, our small businesses, our collective thinking, and ensuring that, as we've talked about throughout this, values and trust and the humanistic side of this pandemic comes to light. I think that's going to be critical.
Fantastic. Great. Well, thanks to all the panelists for their time this evening, to Wayne, to Petrina, and to Nadine. It's been fantastic from my perspective. So thank you for listening to my questions and answering so well. And we've been, for everyone who's been joining on the live stream, we've been recording this as well. So we'll make it available if you'd like to come back and review at any particular time. And also, if you have other questions or other ideas for similar sort of panels, we're doing these for the foreseeable future to keep people up to date, to engage the community, and to also bring a different perspective to the world of COVID, the world of disruption, and our shared futures. So in the meantime, between now and the next one, please stay safe and stay well, and let us know if we can help you in any way. Thanks.
Cheers.
Thanks, Gavin. Thanks, everybody.
Cheers now.